The moment Officer Bradley Matthews raised his hand to strike a 7 months pregnant black woman in open court, he sealed his fate and that of everyone who had enabled the corruption festering in Department 14. The slap echoed through the crowded courtroom like a gunshot. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still, her cheek burning, her hand instinctively moving to protect the life growing inside her. The orange jumpsuit they had forced her to wear hung loose over her swollen belly, a deliberate humiliation designed to strip away dignity before stripping away freedom. 37 people witnessed the assault. 37 people who had sworn oaths to uphold justice, protect the innocent, and serve the community. Not one of them moved to help her. The bailiff adjusted his belt and looked away. The court reporter continued typing as if violence against a pregnant woman was just another line item for the record. Defense attorneys shuffled papers and checked phones, too busy or too afraid to acknowledge what they had just seen. And Judge Harold Morrison, the man who had allowed this courtroom to become a theater of cruelty, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone watching his favorite show. "Sit down and shut up," Officer Matthews snarled, his hand still raised as if considering another blow. "Or you'll get worse than that." Naomi's dark eyes swept across the courtroom, cataloging every face, memorizing every person who had chosen complicity over courage. Her breathing was steady despite the pain radiating across her cheek. Her posture remained straight despite the shackles around her wrists. She did not cry. She did not beg. She did not give them the satisfaction of witnessing her break. Instead, she did something that would haunt Officer Matthews for the rest of his very short career. She smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a broken smile, but the calm, knowing smile of someone who possessed a secret so devastating it would burn this entire corrupt system to the ground. "Officer Matthews," Naomi said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, "I want you to remember this moment. Every detail, every witness, every choice that brought you here." Matthews scoffed, his confidence bolstered by the silence of his colleagues. "Is that a threat? Convict?" "No," Naomi replied, her hand resting gently on her belly. "It is a promise." Judge Morrison banged his gavel with theatrical authority. "The defendant will remain silent, or she will be found in contempt of court. Officer Matthews, restrain her if she speaks again." Matthews stepped closer, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his hand moving toward the baton on his belt. That was when the courtroom door opened. 3 people entered. 2 men in expensive suits and a woman carrying a briefcase that cost more than most people's monthly salary. They moved with the quiet authority of individuals who wielded power rather than simply enforcing it. Federal power. Judge Morrison barely glanced at them, too absorbed in his performance of judicial dominance to notice that everything was about to change. "Your Honor," the lead man said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "I need to speak with you immediately. It is urgent." Morrison waved dismissively. "Court is in session. Whatever it is can wait." "I'm afraid it cannot wait. I am Special Agent Robert Shun with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I have information that directly pertains to this proceeding." The courtroom went silent again, but this time the silence carried a different weight. Danger. Anticipation. The electric charge that fills the air before lightning strikes. Morrison's confidence flickered. Federal agents did not interrupt court proceedings unless something was catastrophically wrong. "What information?" he asked, his voice losing some of its authority. Agent Chen reached into his jacket and produced a leather folder. He approached the bench slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Morrison's increasingly pale face. "Information about the true identity of a defendant you just allowed to be assaulted in your courtroom." Naomi watched from her position between the 2 officers, her expression serene despite the chaos erupting around her. She had been waiting 3 months for this moment. 3 months of enduring humiliation, racism, and brutality while gathering evidence that would expose a corruption network spanning 4 counties. Judge Morrison opened the folder with trembling hands. What he read there made the color drain from his face entirely. "This is impossible," he whispered. "I assure you it is not," Agent Chen replied. "The woman you have been holding in custody for the past 72 hours, the woman Officer Matthews just struck while she was shackled and pregnant, is Federal Judge Naomi Elizabeth Carter of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals." The courtroom erupted. Lawyers jumped to their feet. Officers stepped backward, as if Naomi had suddenly burst into flames. Spectators gasped and whispered and pointed while trying to process what they had just heard. A federal judge, undercover, witnessing everything. Officer Matthews looked at his hand, the hand that had struck her, as if it belonged to someone else. Judge Morrison's gavel fell from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. And Naomi Carter, still shackled, still wearing the orange jumpsuit they had forced on her, finally allowed her smile to reach her eyes. "Officer Matthews," she said softly, "I told you to remember this moment. The reckoning had begun. If you think this story is about one corrupt courtroom, you are wrong. If you think this ends with a few bad officers being disciplined, you are wrong. What Naomi Carter discovered during her 3 months undercover will shatter everything you believe about justice, power, and the price of standing up for what is right. Stay close. Stay watching. Because the woman they thought was powerless is about to teach everyone in that room what real authority looks like. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, do me a favor by clicking the subscribe button. Naomi Carter had been fighting systems of injustice since she was 8 years old. That was when she first understood that the world treated people differently based on the color of their skin. She had been walking home from school in Birmingham, Alabama, her backpack filled with books and her mind filled with dreams, when Officer William Brennan stopped her on the sidewalk 3 blocks from her house. "What are you doing in this neighborhood, girl?" She had stared up at him with the honest confusion of childhood. "I live here, sir. My mama's making dinner. She said I should come straight home. Don't lie to me. Kids like you don't belong in neighborhoods like this. Kids like you." Even at 8 years old, Naomi understood what those words meant. She understood that Officer Brennan looked at her brown skin, her secondhand clothes, her carefully braided hair, and saw something that did not belong, something that needed to be controlled. Her mother had found them 20 minutes later, Naomi sitting on the curb in tears while Officer Brennan stood over her, his hand resting on his weapon as if an elementary school child posed some kind of threat. Dr. Angela Carter had approached with the quiet dignity that came from 30 years of fighting her own battles as one of the few black pediatricians in the state. She had spoken to Officer Brennan with perfect politeness, shown him their address, explained that they had lived in the house for 6 months since her husband's promotion at the engineering firm. Officer Brennan had mumbled an apology that fooled no one and driven away. That night, Dr. Carter had sat on Naomi's bed and explained something that would shape the rest of her daughter's life. "The world is not fair, baby girl. Some people will look at you and see only what they expect to see, not who you really are. You can let that make you small and bitter, or you can use it to make you strong and determined to change things." "How do I change things, Mama?" "You get smart. You get educated. You get powerful. And then you use that power to make sure other little girls don't have to cry on sidewalks for the crime of walking home." 29 years later, Naomi had kept that promise. She had earned her law degree from Harvard, graduated summa cum laude, and clerked for a Supreme Court justice who saw her potential despite the whispered doubts of colleagues who questioned whether a young black woman from Alabama belonged in the highest echelons of American jurisprudence. She had spent 10 years as a federal prosecutor, building cases that dismantled corruption networks, protected civil rights, and held powerful people accountable for their crimes. She had earned a reputation for being brilliant, thorough, and absolutely incorruptible. At 34, she had been nominated to the federal bench, one of the youngest judges in the Ninth Circuit's history. At 37, she was pregnant with her first child and fighting the most important case of her career, the case that had brought her to this courtroom, to this moment, to the orange jumpsuit and shackles that had nearly cost her everything. It had started 6 months ago with a letter, not an official complaint or a formal investigation request, but a desperate, handwritten plea from a woman named Rosa Delgado, whose teenage son had been beaten to death in police custody. The official report called it suicide. Rosa called it murder. "They think because we are poor, because we're not white, that no one will listen," Rosa had written. "But I know my Miguel. He was not perfect, but he was not a killer, and he was not a suicide. They killed him for asking questions about the drugs they planted in his car." The letter had been one of dozens Naomi received every month from people convinced the system had failed them. Most of the time, they were wrong. The system was flawed, certainly, but it generally worked within acceptable parameters. But Rosa's letter was different. It contained details that suggested not just individual corruption, but systematic abuse spanning multiple police departments, prosecutors' offices, and courts. It mentioned names, dates, and patterns that triggered every instinct Naomi had developed in 15 years of fighting institutional corruption. She had made some calls, quiet inquiries to trusted contacts in law enforcement and the justice system. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Rosa Delgado was not paranoid or delusional. She was right. The corruption network centered around Department 14, Judge Morrison's courtroom, but it reached far beyond these walls. Police officers were planting evidence to meet arrest quotas. Prosecutors were withholding exculpatory evidence to maintain conviction rates. Public defenders were being intimidated into providing inadequate representation. And judges, including Morrison, were orchestrating it all in exchange for political support and financial kickbacks from private prison companies that profited from high incarceration rates. The victims were always the same: poor people, immigrants, people of color. People who lacked the resources to fight back, the connections to demand justice, the voices to make anyone listen. People like Rosa Delgado's son. People like the 8-year-old girl Naomi had once been. Exposing the network through traditional channels would have taken years and faced obstacles at every level. Too many people in positions of authority were either complicit or compromised. Too much money was at stake. Too many careers depended on the status quo, continuing undisturbed. So Naomi had proposed something unprecedented to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. She would go undercover. The plan had been carefully constructed over 3 months of preparation. Naomi would assume the identity of Naomi Williams, a single mother with a history of minor drug offenses and outstanding warrants. She would be arrested on deliberately fabricated charges and processed through Department 14 system. She would experience firsthand how the machinery of injustice operated when no one was watching, when no cameras were rolling, when the victims had no recourse and no hope. She would document everything: the physical abuse, the psychological manipulation, the deliberate denial of basic rights, the casual racism that infected every interaction from booking to sentencing. And when she had gathered enough evidence to dismantle the entire network, she would reveal her true identity and watch as careers, reputations, and criminal enterprises collapsed under the weight of federal prosecution. It should have been a straightforward, if dangerous, operation. But Naomi had not anticipated being pregnant when the mission began. She had discovered the pregnancy 2 weeks before her scheduled arrest. David, her husband of 5 years, a civil rights attorney who understood her passion for justice even when it terrified him, had begged her to postpone the operation. "You cannot do this," he had said, holding her in their bedroom while she stared at the positive test. "Not now. Not like this. It is too dangerous. It is dangerous for everyone who cannot fight back," Naomi had replied. Women like Rosa Delgado, who lose their children to a system that sees them as disposable. "If I do not do this now, if I wait until after the baby is born, how many more people will suffer while we delay justice for the sake of convenience?" David had understood. He always understood. But that did not make it easier for either of them. "Promise me you will be careful," he had whispered against her hair. "Promise me you will come home to us." "I promise." She had meant it then. She still meant it now, even as she stood in shackles with the taste of blood in her mouth from Officer Matthews's blow. But some promises were harder to keep than others. The pregnancy had changed everything about the mission. Naomi had experienced the casual cruelty of the system not just as a black woman, but as a pregnant black woman, a demographic that faced even more systematic dehumanization. She had been denied adequate medical care, forced to sleep on concrete floors, subjected to strip searches that violated every standard of human decency. She had watched correctional officers joke about welfare babies and crack mothers while she stood in booking lines. She had listened to prosecutors discuss case loads as if the human beings involved were nothing more than statistics to be manipulated. And she had felt her daughter, yes, daughter, the ultrasound had confirmed it last week, kicking inside her as if in protest against the injustice surrounding them both. This child would grow up in a world where women like her mother could be beaten in courtrooms while officials looked away, where children like Miguel Delgado could be murdered in custody while their families grieved in silence, where power protected itself by destroying anyone who dared to challenge it. Unless Naomi stopped it, unless she used her position, her knowledge, her carefully gathered evidence to burn the entire corrupt system to the ground and build something better in its place. Agent Chun was approaching the bench now, his expression grave as he handed additional documents to Judge Morrison. Naomi watched the man who had presided over countless miscarriages of justice realize that his kingdom was crumbling around him. In 30 minutes, she would remove these shackles, step out of this orange jumpsuit, and take her rightful place behind the bench. She would reveal the scope of the corruption she had witnessed, the evidence she had gathered, the names of every person who had chosen complicity over courage. But first, she would think about the promise she had made to David, to their unborn daughter, and to every person who had suffered in silence while waiting for someone with power to notice their pain. She would think about the 8-year-old girl who had cried on a sidewalk because a police officer decided she did not belong in her own neighborhood. And she would remember that justice delayed was not always justice denied. Sometimes it was justice gathering strength for a reckoning that would shake the foundations of every corrupt institution that had forgotten its purpose. The revolution was about to begin. The explosion of voices that followed Agent Chin's revelation was unlike anything Naomi had witnessed in 15 years of courtroom experience. Lawyers shouted over each other, demanding explanations. Court officers scrambled to understand their new reality, that they had been detaining, restraining, and assaulting a federal judge for 3 months. Spectators pulled out phones, desperate to capture the moment that would redefine every news cycle for weeks to come. But it was the silence from 3 specific people that told Naomi everything she needed to know. Officer Matthews stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, terror, and the dawning realization that his career was not just over. It was about to become a cautionary tale taught in police academies nationwide. Judge Morrison clutched the documents Agent Chun had given him with hands that shook so violently the papers rustled like autumn leaves. His judicial robes, symbols of authority he had perverted for personal gain, suddenly looked like a costume on a man playing dress-up. And in the back corner of the courtroom, partially hidden behind a pillar, Assistant District Attorney Marcus Rivera went completely still. That stillness caught Naomi's attention like a movement would have. In the chaos erupting around them, why was one person, a person who should have been as shocked as everyone else, reacting with the controlled calm of someone who had been expecting this moment? Marcus Rivera had been assigned as the prosecutor on her case 3 days ago. Young, ambitious, with a reputation for aggressive tactics and an impressive conviction rate. He had pushed for her to be held without bail despite the nonviolent nature of the charges. He had objected to every motion her public defender had filed. And now, as federal agents moved through the courtroom like sharks sensing blood in the water, Marcus was edging toward the exit with the practiced stealth of someone who understood that proximity to this disaster would destroy anyone caught in its wake. "Stop him," Naomi said quietly. Agent Chun followed her gaze and saw what she saw. A man fleeing a scene he should have had no reason to flee. Agent Torres, Chun barked to one of his colleagues, "Detain ADA Rivera. No one leaves this courtroom until we sort this out." Marcus froze 3 feet from the door. When he turned back toward the courtroom, his carefully constructed mask of professional competence had slipped just enough to reveal something underneath that made Naomi's blood run cold. Guilt. Not the guilt of someone caught off guard by unprecedented circumstances, but the guilt of someone whose carefully laid plans were unraveling in real time. Marcus Rivera knew exactly who she was, had known all along, which meant the corruption network was not just bigger than they had anticipated. It was deeper, more sophisticated, and infinitely more dangerous. "Your Honor," Agent Chun addressed Judge Morrison, though his tone carried no respect for the title. "I'm going to need you to step down from the bench immediately. This courtroom is now under federal jurisdiction." Morrison's voice cracked when he tried to speak. "You cannot simply. This is highly irregular. What is irregular is a sitting judge allowing a pregnant federal colleague to be physically assaulted in his courtroom while she was conducting an authorized investigation into judicial corruption." Agent Chin's words carried the weight of inevitable prosecution. "You are suspended from judicial duties effective immediately, pending a full investigation by the Department of Justice." Morrison stumbled down from the bench like a man sleepwalking through his own nightmare. Agent Chun turned to address the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, What you have witnessed here today is part of an ongoing federal investigation into systematic corruption within this judicial district. Judge Carter has been operating under deep cover for the past 3 months, documenting violations of civil rights, police brutality, and judicial misconduct. Naomi watched, faces throughout the courtroom, as the implications sank in. Defense attorneys who had provided inadequate representation suddenly understood they might face obstruction of justice charges. Court officers who had participated in illegal searches realized their qualified immunity would not protect them from federal prosecution. And somewhere in that sea of guilty faces was a network of conspirators who had been profiting from human misery for years. "Agent Chun," Naomi said, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "I need these restraints removed. Now." "Of course, Your Honor." The honorific felt strange after 3 months of being called convict and worse. But it also felt powerful, a reminder of who she really was, what she represented, and the authority she was about to wield. Officer Matthews fumbled with the keys to her shackles, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key into the lock. When the metal finally fell away from her wrists, Naomi rubbed the marks they had left, evidence that would be photographed, documented, and presented to every jury that would eventually hear the cases against these people. "Mrs. Williams, Your Honor, I need you to know that I was just following orders," Matthews stammered. "Judge Morrison said you were dangerous, that you had a history of assaulting officers." "Officer Matthews," Naomi interrupted quietly, "I advise you to stop talking immediately and contact an attorney. Anything you say from this moment forward will be used against you in federal court." Matthews's mouth snapped shut. Agent Chun approached with a garment bag. "Your Honor, we brought your judicial robes. If you're ready to assume your duties." "Not yet." The response surprised everyone, including Agent Chun. "Your Honor." Naomi looked around the courtroom, at the lawyers scrambling to distance themselves from potential criminal charges, at the officers who had brutalized her trying to fade into invisibility, at Marcus Rivera standing under federal guard with the expression of a man calculating his options. "This investigation is not complete," she said. "What we have exposed here today is significant, but it is not the entire network. If I assume my judicial role now, if I step behind that bench in my robes, everyone involved will immediately lawyer up and begin destroying evidence. We will get the small fish, but the people at the top of this conspiracy will disappear into legal maneuvers and political connections." She paused, her hand moving instinctively to her belly where her daughter was moving restlessly, as if sensing her mother's determination. "I want to continue the undercover operation for 24 more hours." The silence that followed was deafening. "Absolutely not," Agent Shin said immediately. "Your Honor, you have already been assaulted while in custody. Your pregnancy puts both you and your child at risk. We have enough evidence to begin prosecutions. We have evidence of individual crimes. We do not have evidence of the conspiracy itself. We do not know who is giving the orders, who is receiving the profits, who has been orchestrating this entire system." Naomi's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years making life and death decisions from behind a federal bench. 24 hours. Long enough to identify the real power structure before it can protect itself. "Judge Carter," a new voice said from the courtroom entrance. Everyone turned to see a man in an expensive suit striding down the aisle with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Deputy Attorney General William Cross, Naomi's direct superior in the federal hierarchy, and one of only 6 people who had known about her undercover mission from the beginning. "Sir," Agent Shin straightened, clearly relieved to have higher authority present to make the difficult decisions. Cross approached the front of the courtroom, his eyes moving from Naomi to the chaos around them, taking in the scope of what had been exposed. "Judge Carter," he said when he reached her, "are you all right?" "I'm fine, sir. But I have a request that Agent Chun is understandably reluctant to approve. Continue the operation for 24 hours. There are layers to this conspiracy that we have not yet uncovered. If we move too quickly, the people at the top will escape accountability." Cross studied her for a long moment. Naomi could see him weighing the political ramifications, the personal risks, the potential for this entire operation to explode into a national scandal that could damage careers throughout the Department of Justice. "You were assaulted while pregnant and in custody," he said finally. Yes. By officers who knew you were defenseless and posed no threat. Yes. And your assessment is that 24 more hours would allow you to identify the command structure of this corruption network. Yes, sir. Cross looked around the courtroom, his gaze lingering on Marcus Rivera, who had been watching this exchange with increasing desperation. ADA Rivera, Cross called. Step forward. Marcus approached reluctantly, flanked by Agent Torres. You have been the prosecutor on Judge Carter's case, Cross continued. You pushed for her to be held without bail on nonviolent charges. You objected to routine motions that should have been granted automatically. I was following prosecutorial guidelines. You were following someone's instructions to ensure a federal judge remained in custody long enough to be broken or silenced. Cross's tone was ice. The question is, whose instructions? Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. I want to speak to my attorney. You will have that opportunity. But first, you're going to help us understand exactly how deep this conspiracy goes. Cross turned back to Naomi. Judge Carter, I am going to approve your request with conditions. You will have backup position within immediate response distance. You will have constant communication capability. And at the first sign that your safety or your pregnancy is at risk, this operation ends immediately. Understood. 24 hours to identify the head of the snake. Then we cut it off. As Cross spoke, Naomi noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Marcus Rivera was looking not at the Deputy Attorney General, not at the federal agents, but directly at her. And in his eyes was not defeat or fear, but something much more dangerous. Recognition. Marcus Rivera knew exactly who was running this conspiracy, and he had just realized that Naomi Carter was about to expose them all. The question was, what was he willing to do to stop her? The holding cell beneath the courthouse smelled of disinfectant and human desperation. Naomi had been returned here after the courtroom revelation, a necessary part of maintaining the fiction that nothing had fundamentally changed. To anyone watching who was not part of the inner circle, she was still Naomi Williams, the pregnant defendant who had caused a disturbance that required federal intervention to resolve. The orange jumpsuit felt different now, though, less like a humiliation and more like armor. Every indignity she endured, every cruel word she heard, every violation of her rights was building toward the moment when the entire corrupt system would collapse under the weight of its own evil. But 24 hours suddenly felt like 24 years. She sat on the narrow bench, her back against the concrete wall, one hand resting on her belly where her daughter was particularly active tonight. As if sensing her mother's tension, the baby kept shifting and kicking, restless movements that made it difficult for Naomi to find any comfortable position. Easy, little one, she whispered. Mama is going to fix this place before you have to see it. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her look up. A guard was approaching, not one she recognized from the past 3 months. This man was younger, cleaner, with the bearing of someone who had not yet been ground down by years of working in the system. Williams, he called, stopping in front of her cell. You have a visitor. Naomi frowned. According to the protocols Agent Shun had established, she should not be receiving any visits that were not part of the planned investigation. Ooh, your attorney. Rivera sent him over. Marcus Rivera had sent someone to see her. The same Marcus Rivera who had been trying to flee the courtroom when federal agent arrived. The same Marcus Rivera who clearly knew more about her true identity than he should have. Every instinct Naomi had developed in 15 years of legal work screamed danger. But she also knew that refusing to see the visitor would break character and potentially compromise the entire operation. All right, she said, rising slowly from the bench. Let me see him. The attorney waiting in the cramped interview room was not what Naomi expected. He was perhaps 40 years old, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most public defenders made in a month. His dark hair was silver at the temples, and his eyes were the kind of deep brown that suggested intelligence, compassion, and just enough danger to make conversation interesting. But it was the way he stood when she entered, rising immediately, pulling out her chair, waiting for her to sit before taking his own seat, that told Naomi this was not a typical legal consultation. Ms. Williams, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that sounded like money and education. My name is Daniel Moreau. ADA Rivera asked me to represent you in this matter. I did not ask for new representation. No, but given the complexity of your situation, Mr. Rivera felt you needed someone with more specialized experience. Daniel Moreau placed a business card on the table between them. Moreau and Associates, Criminal Defense. Below his name, in smaller print, was a line that made Naomi's blood run cold. Former Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. He knew exactly who she was. Mr. Moreau, Naomi said carefully, I think there might be some confusion about my case. I am facing simple drug possession charges. Nothing that would require someone with your apparent qualifications. Daniel smiled. A warm, genuine expression that somehow made him more dangerous rather than less. Ms. Williams, we both know that your case is far more complicated than drug possession charges. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. The question is whether you are prepared to discuss those complications honestly, or whether you prefer to continue this performance a little longer. The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of doors closing somewhere in the building. Naomi studied the man across from her, cataloging every detail. The expensive watch that suggested wealth beyond a typical defense attorney's income. The small scar on his left hand that looked like the result of violence rather than accident. The way his eyes never left her face, as if he was memorizing every micro-expression. I do not know what you think you know about my case, she said finally, but I assure you that I am exactly who I appear to be. A 7 months pregnant black woman from Birmingham, Alabama, with a history of minor drug offenses and outstanding warrants in 3 states. Yes, a woman whose fingerprints somehow do not appear in any federal database despite multiple arrests. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. A woman whose medical records indicate she is highly educated, with dental work that suggests access to expensive health care throughout her life. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance images of Naomi entering and leaving the courthouse over the past 3 months, but also older photographs that made her stomach drop. Pictures of her at Harvard Law School graduation. Pictures of her wedding to David. Pictures of her being sworn in as a federal judge. A woman, Daniel continued quietly, whose real name is Naomi Elizabeth Carter, and who has been conducting an unauthorized investigation that threatens to expose a corruption network worth approximately $40 million annually. The word unauthorized hit Naomi like a physical blow. What did you say? The investigation you believe was approved by the Department of Justice was never officially sanctioned. Someone has been feeding you false information, Judge Carter. Someone wanted you here, in this position, vulnerable and isolated. Naomi felt the world tilting around her. Everything, the months of planning, the careful coordination with Agent Shun, the approval from Deputy Attorney General Cross, all of it had been orchestrated to put her exactly where she was now. Alone, pregnant, surrounded by enemies who knew her real identity. That is impossible. I spoke directly with DG Cross. I had authorization documents forged. Very sophisticated forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Daniel's expression was sympathetic but firm. Judge Carter, you are not conducting an investigation. You are the target of one. The room spun. Naomi gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, her mind racing through the implications of what he was telling her. If the operation had never been authorized, then Agent Shun was not who he claimed to be. The federal agents in the courtroom had been actors. The dramatic revelation of her identity had been theater designed to serve someone else's agenda. But whose agenda? And why? I need proof, she said. Daniel reached into his folder again and produced a single sheet of paper. Official Department of Justice letterhead. A memo dated 6 months ago, before her investigation had supposedly begun. Subject, Judge Naomi Carter. Security risk assessment. The document outlined concerns about Naomi's activist tendencies and willingness to exceed judicial authority in pursuit of social justice goals. It recommended increased surveillance and appropriate containment measures to prevent her from destabilizing ongoing operations. Naomi read the memo twice, her hands trembling. Ongoing operations? The corruption network you have been investigating is not an accident, Judge Carter. It is a carefully constructed system designed to generate profits for a consortium of investors who have turned criminal justice into a business model. Daniel produced another document, a corporate filing for a company called Justice Solutions Incorporated. The list of board members made Naomi's blood turn to ice. 3 sitting federal judges. 2 U.S. senators, for police chiefs, and at the top of the list, serving as chairman of the board, Deputy Attorney General William Cross. The man who had approved her mission was the head of the conspiracy she was supposedly investigating. "My God," she whispered. "They needed someone to serve as a scapegoat," Daniel continued. "Someone whose investigation could be discredited, whose evidence could be dismissed, whose reputation could be destroyed to protect the larger operation. A pregnant black woman investigating racial corruption? Perfect victim, especially one who thought she was operating with federal authority." Naomi felt her daughter kick sharply, as if responding to her mother's stress. She placed both hands on her belly, trying to calm herself and the life inside her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because, Judge Carter, you have two choices. You can continue this investigation as the unwitting pawn of people who plan to destroy you. Or you can work with me to expose the real conspiracy and bring down everyone involved." "Work with you how?" Daniel's smile returned, but this time it carried an edge that made Naomi think of wolves. "By giving them exactly what they want, and then using their greed against them." The plan Daniel outlined was audacious, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also the only way to survive. According to Daniel, the consortium had spent 3 years building a network that generated profits through systematic corruption. High arrest rates led to higher conviction rates, which led to longer sentences, which led to higher occupancy in private prisons owned by consortium members. Police departments received federal grants for meeting arrest quotas. Prosecutors received career advancement for maintaining conviction statistics. Judges received political support and financial incentives for imposing harsh sentences. And at every level, anyone who questioned the system faced career destruction, legal harassment, or worse. Miguel Delgado, the teenager whose death had started Naomi's investigation, had not been killed for asking questions about planted evidence. He had been killed because he had accidentally discovered one of the consortium's money laundering operations and was about to expose it. His mother's letter to Naomi had been intercepted. Instead of ignoring it, the consortium had seen an opportunity. If they could manipulate a federal judge into conducting a fake investigation, they could control the narrative, discredit any real evidence, and eliminate the threat of future exposure. Naomi had walked directly into their trap. "The beautiful part," Daniel explained, "is that they have documented everything. Financial records, communication logs, video surveillance of their meetings. They needed detailed records to manage such a complex operation. And you know where these records are kept?" "I know because I helped design the system that protects them." Naomi stared at him. "You are part of this conspiracy." "I was. For 3 years, I provided legal advice on how to structure their operations to avoid federal prosecution. I helped them identify threats and neutralize opposition. I made a great deal of money doing it. And now," Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. 6 months ago, they asked me to handle a different kind of problem. A prosecutor in Miami who was getting too close to their drug money laundering operations. They wanted him eliminated. Eliminated? Killed. Made it look like an accident or suicide, just like Miguel Delgado. Naomi felt sick. "Did you know? I told them I was a lawyer, not an assassin, and that I wanted out of the entire operation." His voice hardened. "They told me that no one leaves Justice Solutions Incorporated voluntarily. They had detailed records of every crime I'd helped them commit. I was trapped. What changed? The prosecutor they wanted killed was my brother." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. They did not know about our relationship. Different last names, different cities, different areas of practice. But when they asked me to arrange Gabriel's death, to help them murder my own brother to protect their profits, I realized I had become something I could never live with. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. "For the past 6 months, I've been documenting everything. Every meeting, every conversation, every order to commit crimes. I have enough evidence to destroy the entire network, but I need someone with federal authority to act on it. Someone like a federal judge. Someone exactly like a federal judge." Naomi looked at the recording device, then at Daniel's face. She saw desperation there, and guilt, and something that might have been hope. But she also saw opportunity. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Tomorrow night, Justice Solutions Incorporated is holding their annual board meeting. All the major players will be there, Cross, the judges, the senators, everyone. They are going to discuss the final phase of their expansion plan and divide up this year's profits. Where? A private estate in Malibu. Completely secure, or so they believe. I designed their security protocols. I know how to get inside. Naomi's pulse quickened. To do what? To record everything. To gather evidence that cannot be denied or dismissed. To catch them in the act of conspiracy, money laundering, and planning additional murders. That is incredibly dangerous. If they discover us, then we die, and they continue destroying lives for profit. Daniel leaned across the table. Judge Carter, these people ordered the death of a pregnant teenager's boyfriend to protect their business model. They manipulated you into a situation where you could be discredited or killed. They will not stop until they control every aspect of the criminal justice system. Naomi thought about Miguel Delgado, beaten to death in a cell not 20 miles from where she sat. She thought about Rosa Delgado, still mourning her son while his killers counted their profits. She thought about her own daughter, who would grow up in a world where justice was for sale to the highest bidder, unless she stopped it. I need guarantees, she said finally. What kind of guarantees? Medical support. If something happens to me, if the stress or danger threatens my pregnancy, I need to know my daughter will be protected. Done. Communication with my husband. David needs to know I am alive and safe. Agreed. And if we succeed, if we get the evidence we need, you testify against everyone involved. No immunity deals, no protected witness programs. You face the consequences of what you helped them do. Daniel nodded slowly. I expected nothing less. Naomi studied his face one more time, searching for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that this was another manipulation. But what she saw was something she recognized from her own mirror over the past 3 months. The look of someone who had lost their way and was desperate for a chance at redemption. All right, she said. Let us bring down Justice Solutions Incorporated. The next 18 hours passed like a fever dream. Naomi remained in custody, playing her role as the confused defendant, while Daniel coordinated the most complex undercover operation of her career. Federal agents, real federal agents, this time contacted through channels that bypassed the corrupted Department of Justice, positioned themselves around the Malibu estate. Marcus Rivera, meanwhile, had disappeared. According to the guards, he had left the courthouse immediately after the federal intervention and had not returned. His office was cleaned out. His files were missing. Even his parking pass had been turned in. But Daniel assured her this was expected. Rivera was never a major player, he explained during one of their brief meetings. He was just a mid-level facilitator who handled day-to-day prosecutions. With the operation blown, he is running to whatever hole the consortium prepared for situations like this. And you do not think you will warn them about tonight? Rivera does not know about tonight. The board meeting was planned months ago, and only the top tier has access to that information. Naomi hoped Daniel was right, but she had learned over the past 3 months that hope was a luxury she could not afford. As evening approached and the time for the operation drew near, she found herself thinking about David. He would be at home now, probably sitting in the nursery they had prepared together, wondering if his wife and daughter were safe. She had not been allowed to call him since the operation began. Security protocols, they had told her, maintaining operational integrity. Now she understood that the isolation had been deliberate, another way to ensure she had no support, no allies, no way to verify the information she was being given. But tonight that isolation would end. Tonight, she would either expose the conspiracy that had corrupted the justice system she had devoted her life to serving, or she would die trying. Either way, her daughter would grow up in a world where her mother had refused to accept that evil was stronger than justice. That was worth any risk. At 11 p.m., Daniel returned to her cell with a guard Naomi did not recognize. Time to go, he said quietly. Where? To finish what you started 3 months ago. Naomi stood, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. Her daughter was quiet now, as if sensing the importance of the next few hours. Are you ready for this, Judge Carter? Naomi looked at Daniel. This man who had been part of the conspiracy that nearly destroyed her, who was now risking everything to help her expose it. This man whose brother was alive because he had chosen redemption over self-preservation. I have been ready my entire life, she said. Together, they walked out of the cell and toward a reckoning that would change everything. The Malibu estate perched on the cliffs like a monument to corruption disguised as success. Naomi crouched behind a wall of perfectly manicured hedges, her pregnant belly making the position uncomfortable but manageable. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main house, she could see figures moving around a conference table, shadows of the most powerful people in California's justice system, gathered to divide the profits of human misery. Daniel was beside her, adjusting the sophisticated recording equipment that would capture every word spoken in that room. The technology was military-grade, borrowed from contacts he had cultivated during his years helping Justice Solutions Incorporated evade federal detection. "Audio is clear," he whispered, handing her an earpiece. "Video feeds are active. Everything they say and do will be recorded in real time and transmitted to our backup servers." Naomi fitted the earpiece and immediately heard voices from inside the house. Casual conversation about golf, stock portfolios, and vacation homes, as if they were attending a corporate retreat rather than planning the continuation of systematic human rights violations. "How many people are inside?" she asked. 12 confirmed. Cross is there, along with the 3 federal judges, the 2 senators for police chiefs, and 2 private prison executives. Daniel paused. "Plus 1 person I did not expect to see." "Who?" Before Daniel could answer, a new voice came through the earpiece. Familiar, warm, tinged with the slight southern accent that had once made Naomi feel safe and loved. "Gentlemen, thank you for gathering on such short notice. I know this emergency session was inconvenient, but recent developments have forced us to accelerate our timeline." Naomi's blood turned to ice. The voice belonged to her husband, David Carter, the man who had held her while she cried about injustice, who had supported her career despite the dangers it posed to their family, who had begged her not to take this undercover assignment, was sitting at the head of the table in that conference room. "No," she whispered, pulling out the earpiece as if the physical disconnection could somehow make what she was hearing untrue. Daniel's expression was grim. "I'm sorry, Naomi. I was hoping I was wrong. David is not. He cannot be." Her voice cracked. "You made a mistake. That is someone else. I wish it were." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet, showing her surveillance footage from inside the house. There was no mistaking the figure at the head of the table, the man she had been married to for 5 years, the father of her unborn child, speaking with the authority of someone who had been running this conspiracy from the beginning. Naomi felt her world collapse completely. Every conversation they had shared about justice, about fighting corruption, about making the world better for their daughter, all of it had been a performance. Every night she had fallen asleep in his arms. He had been planning the destruction of everything she believed in. And the undercover operation that had nearly killed her? He had orchestrated it himself. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I suspected for months." David Carter was too convenient. A civil rights attorney who just happened to be married to the judge investigating civil rights violations, who just happened to support her dangerous assignment. But I could not prove it until tonight. Through the window, they could see David standing at a presentation screen, pointing to charts and graphs that looked like corporate earnings reports. "The Naomi Carter operation has been a complete success." His voice continued through the earpiece Naomi had reluctantly replaced. "We have documented her investigating activities, discredited her credibility through the pregnancy complications, and positioned her for complete elimination without raising federal suspicion." Naomi's hand flew to her belly. "Elimination? The plan was always to kill you," Daniel said quietly. "Make it look like pregnancy complications or stress-related cardiac arrest. A tragic end to a respected judge who pushed herself too hard. Your death would have ended any investigation into Justice Solutions Incorporated, and your husband would have inherited your federal pension plus a substantial life insurance payout. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated betrayal by the person she had trusted most, made Naomi physically sick. She leaned against the hedge, struggling to breathe, feeling her daughter moving restlessly inside her as if sensing her mother's distress. "But something went wrong with their plan," Daniel continued. "You were stronger than they expected. You survived 3 months in custody without breaking, without giving them the excuse they needed to eliminate you. And then I complicated things by approaching you." "Why?" Naomi looked at him through tears she had not realized were falling. "Why did you really approach me? If your brother was safe, if you had already decided to betray the conspiracy, Why get involved at all? Daniel was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the house where her husband was explaining how to profit from her death. Because 23 years ago, an 8-year-old girl in Birmingham, Alabama, was stopped by a police officer who decided she did not belong in her own neighborhood. Naomi's breath caught. Officer William Brennan was my father. The world tilted again. Everything she thought she understood about her life, her mission, her purpose, all of it was connected to a moment she had tried to forget, a trauma that had shaped her entire worldview without her realizing the reach of its influence. Your father destroyed my childhood, she whispered. My father destroyed a lot of things, including his family. Daniel's voice was raw with old pain. He came home that night, raging about uppity-colored kids and their doctor mothers who thought they belonged in white neighborhoods. He was drunk, violent, and looking for someone to blame for his own failures. What happened? He beat my mother unconscious. When I tried to stop him, he turned on me. Daniel showed her the scar on his hand she had noticed earlier. That was from a broken bottle. I was 11 years old. Naomi stared at him, beginning to understand the deeper currents that had brought them together. My mother left him that night. We moved across the country, changed our names, started over. But I never forgot what he said about you, about the little girl who had dared to walk in her own neighborhood. I spent years wondering what happened to that child, whether she survived growing up in a world that saw her as a threat. And when you discovered I was investigating corruption, I knew it was you. The age matched, the location matched, and your passion for civil rights was exactly what I would have expected from someone who had faced that injustice so young. Daniel turned to face her fully. I've spent my entire adult life trying to atone for my father's sins. When I learned that Justice Solutions Incorporated was targeting you specifically, when I realized that David Carter had chosen you as a victim partly because your activism made you a threat to their system, I knew I had to act. The revelation was overwhelming. The man who had tormented her as a child was the father of the man now risking everything to save her. The random act of cruelty that had shaped her entire life was connected to this moment, this choice, this opportunity for justice. David targeted me because of my activism. Your reputation as someone who would not compromise on civil rights made you dangerous to their business model. But it also made you the perfect scapegoat. Who would question the investigation of a judge known for pushing boundaries? Who would be surprised if that judge went too far and destroyed herself in the process? Through the window, David was concluding his presentation. Phase 2 begins tomorrow, he announced. Naomi's elimination will be staged as a medical emergency during transport to federal court. The stress of the investigation, combined with pregnancy complications, will provide cover for what appears to be natural causes. Naomi felt her daughter kick sharply, as if protesting the casual discussion of their deaths. We have to stop this, she said, struggling to stand. We have to get that evidence, and Naomi, wait. Daniel caught her arm gently. There is something else you need to know. What? The people in that room? They are not the real power structure. They are middle management. She stared at him. What do you mean? Justice Solutions Incorporated is a subsidiary of a larger corporation. The corruption network you have been investigating spans all 50 states, with operations in 32 countries. The people in that house tonight manage the California operation, but they answer to someone much more powerful. Who? Daniel hesitated, and in that hesitation, Naomi saw something that terrified her more than David's betrayal, more than the threat to her life. Fear. The chairman of the parent corporation is someone you know, someone who has been watching your career for years, waiting for the right moment to neutralize the threat you represent. Tell me, Justice Ruth Harrison. The name hit Naomi like a physical blow. Justice Ruth Harrison, the first black woman appointed to the Supreme Court. The civil rights icon who had inspired Naomi's entire career. The judicial hero whose opinions had shaped modern civil rights law. The woman Naomi had clerked for fresh out of Harvard Law School. That is impossible. I have proof. Daniel showed her another file on his tablet. Corporate documents, financial records, communication logs spanning 15 years. Justice Harrison created Justice Solutions Incorporated shortly after her appointment to the Supreme Court. She has been using her position to identify and eliminate threats to the profitable prison system while publicly advocating for criminal justice reform. Naomi felt the last of her faith in the justice system crumble. She recommended me for the federal bench. She groomed you for it. put you in position to be controlled or destroyed when you became inconvenient. Daniel's voice was gentle but relentless. Every major decision in your career has been influenced by Ruth Harrison. Your clerkship with her, your appointment as a federal prosecutor, your judicial nomination, all of it designed to eventually put you exactly where you are now. The betrayal was total, complete, devastating. Not just her husband, but her mentor, her inspiration, the woman she had modeled her entire career after. How many people are part of this? Thousands. Judges, prosecutors, police officers, prison officials, politicians at every level of government. It is not a conspiracy, Naomi. It is a system. A carefully designed machine that converts human rights violations into corporate profits while maintaining the illusion of justice. Naomi closed her eyes, feeling her daughter moving inside her, and made a decision that would either save them both or destroy them. Then we burn it all down. When she opened her eyes, Daniel saw something there that made him step back involuntarily. Not defeat, not despair, revolution. The evidence we gather tonight is not going to the Department of Justice, she continued. It is not going to federal prosecutors or congressional oversight committees or anyone else who might be compromised. Where is it going? Naomi smiled, the same smile that had frightened Officer Matthews in the courtroom, the smile of someone who possessed devastating power and the will to use it. Primetime television, social media, every journalist in the country who is not owned by the same interests that own the justice system. She placed her hand on her belly. My daughter is going to be born into a world where people know exactly how their government really works, and then they can decide what to do about it. Daniel stared at her, and for the first time since this all began, Naomi saw something in his eyes that she had not seen before. Hope. You want to expose everything? Not just Justice Solutions Incorporated, but the entire network. Everything. Every name. Every crime. Every dollar stolen from communities that deserve justice. She looked toward the house where her husband was planning her murder. They have spent years underestimating me, using my idealism against me, treating me like a pawn in their game. And now they are about to discover what happens when you corner a federal judge with nothing left to lose. Through the window, the meeting was breaking up. Members of the conspiracy were shaking hands, making plans, dividing up profits from the destruction of human lives. They had no idea that everything they had just said was being recorded. They had no idea that their victim had become their executioner. And they had no idea that the revolution they had spent so long trying to prevent was about to begin in earnest. Naomi Carter stood in the shadows outside that house, her hand on her pregnant belly, and prepared to burn down the world. The darkest hour came at 2:17 a.m., when Naomi realized that even exposing the conspiracy might not be enough to save her daughter's life. She was crouched behind the estate's security wall, watching through night vision equipment as the Justice Solutions Incorporated board members prepared to leave. The evidence was captured. Hours of recorded conversations, financial documents, detailed plans for expanding their corruption network across the country. But Daniel had just received a message that changed everything. They know we are here, he whispered, showing her his phone. Security sweep detected our equipment. They are not leaving. They are hunting. Through the darkness, Naomi could see armed figures moving around the perimeter of the estate. Not security guards. These men moved with the precision of military contractors, the kind of people who made problems disappear permanently. How many, she asked. At least 12. Probably more. Naomi felt her daughter kicking frantically, as if sensing the danger closing around them. 7 months pregnant, exhausted from 3 months of abuse, surrounded by killers who included her own husband. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, and instead it was becoming her tomb. We should run, Daniel said. Get to the backup team, transmit what we have, let federal authorities handle the rest. What backup team? Naomi's voice was flat. You said yourself that this corruption network reaches every level of government. Who exactly do you think we can trust with this information? The question hung between them like a death sentence. Every agency that should have protected her had been compromised. Every authority figure who should have stood for justice was either bought, blackmailed, or too terrified to act. She was alone, pregnant, and facing an enemy that controlled the very system designed to ensure accountability. But if you think this story ends with Naomi Carter broken and defeated, You don't know what kind of woman survives 3 months in hell and emerges stronger than when she entered. If you're feeling the tension right now, if your heart is pounding and you're desperate to know how she escapes this impossible situation, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what happens next will restore your faith in the power of truth to overcome even the most entrenched corruption. Now let's watch Naomi Carter teach the world what real justice looks like. The turning point came when Naomi's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a number she didn't recognize. Judge Carter, this is Agent Sarah Kim, FBI Internal Affairs. Daniel Moreau contacted us 6 hours ago through secure channels. We have teams positioned around the estate. You are not alone. Naomi showed the message to Daniel, who stared at it with disbelief. Internal Affairs? You thought everyone was compromised. Naomi was already typing a response. But corruption, this massive, requires oversight corruption to hide it. And oversight corruption creates enemies within law enforcement. People who became agents to fight crime, not enable it. Her response was brief. Proof of identity required. The answer came immediately. A photograph showing Agent Kim holding today's newspaper outside FBI headquarters, along with federal credentials and a secure communication protocol that would have been impossible for the conspiracy to fake. 6 months ago, Kim's follow-up message read, Daniel Moreau reached out to our office with preliminary evidence of Justice Solutions Incorporated. We have been building a parallel investigation while waiting for an opportunity to gather definitive proof. Tonight is that opportunity. Naomi felt hope flooding through her for the first time in hours. How many agents? She typed. 43. We have the estate completely surrounded. But we need the recordings you gathered tonight to move forward with arrests. And David Carter? There was a pause before the response came. Your husband is already in custody. We arrested him as he left the estate 20 minutes ago. The confrontation happened in the estate's main conference room, where the remaining conspiracy members had barricaded themselves after discovering the breach. Naomi walked through the front door like she owned the place, which in a sense she did. Federal law gave her the authority to go anywhere, question anyone, and demand accountability from any person who had violated their oath to serve justice. Even while wearing a wire and surrounded by FBI agents, she had never felt more powerful. Deputy Attorney General Cross was slumped in a chair, his face gray with the knowledge that his career and freedom were over. The two senators sat in stunned silence, already calculating which attorney they would call first. The police chiefs and prison executives huddled together like children caught stealing candy. And in the center of it all, connected via video conference from her Supreme Court chambers, was Justice Ruth Harrison. Judge Carter, Harrison's image said from the large screen, her voice carrying the same warmth and authority that had once inspired Naomi's entire career. I think we can resolve this situation amicably. Justice Harrison, Naomi replied, settling into a chair despite her pregnancy, making every position uncomfortable. I think you misunderstand the nature of this situation. You are pregnant, exhausted, and operating under tremendous emotional stress. Your husband's betrayal has clearly affected your judgment. But we can protect you, protect your child, if you are willing to be reasonable. The offer was smooth, practiced, designed to appeal to a mother's protective instincts. Naomi smiled. Justice Harrison, 3 months ago, I might have been tempted by that offer. 3 months ago, I still believed that the system could be reformed from within, that good people in positions of power would eventually do the right thing. She gestured to the documents spread across the conference table. Evidence of 15 years of systematic corruption. But 3 months in your prison system taught me something important. The system isn't broken. The system is working exactly as you designed it, to extract profits from human suffering while maintaining the illusion of justice for people privileged enough to afford it. Harrison's composure flickered. You're talking about dismantling institutions that have maintained order for centuries. Do you understand the chaos that would result? I am talking about exposing institutions that have perverted justice for profit. Naomi stood, her hand resting on her belly. And I'm not talking about it anymore. I'm doing it. She nodded to Agent Kim, who activated the transmission protocol they had prepared. Every major news network, every social media platform, every journalist who had ever written about criminal justice reform. The evidence was uploading in real time, protected by encryption protocols that made it impossible to suppress or deny. Financial records showing millions of dollars in profits from false convictions. Video recordings of conspiracy members planning murders. Audio evidence of federal officials ordering civil rights violations. And most damaging of all, the complete membership list of Justice Solutions Incorporated, including Supreme Court justices, federal judges, senators, governors, and police officials in all 50 states. "You have no idea what you have done," Harrison said, her mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. "I know exactly what I have done," Naomi replied. "I have given the American people the truth about how their justice system really works. What they do with that truth is up to them." The aftermath unfolded like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Within 6 hours, protests erupted in 43 cities. Within 12 hours, congressional leaders were calling for emergency hearings. Within 24 hours, Justice Ruth Harrison had resigned from the Supreme Court and was facing federal conspiracy charges. David Carter was arrested at LAX, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country. He was carrying false identification documents and nearly $2 million in cash. Evidence of the escape plan Justice Solutions Incorporated had prepared for exactly this scenario. Marcus Rivera was found dead in his hotel room, an apparent suicide that fooled no one. The note he left behind contained a full confession and the locations of additional evidence that implicated hundreds of other conspirators. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later, when Naomi sat in her real courtroom, the federal courthouse where she belonged, and watched Officer Bradley Matthews be sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for civil rights violations. "Your Honor," Matthews said during his allocution, "I want to apologize for striking you. I was following orders, but that is no excuse for assaulting a pregnant woman." Naomi studied the man who had slapped her while she was shackled and defenseless, who had threatened to do worse if she spoke again. "Officer Matthews," she said quietly, "your apology is noted, but you seem to misunderstand something fundamental about what happened in that courtroom." Matthews looked confused. "You were not just following orders when you struck me. You were participating in a system designed to strip dignity from people who cannot defend themselves. The fact that I am a federal judge made your actions a federal crime, but the fact that I am a human being made them a moral one." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "The sentence I am imposing today is not just for the assault against me. It is for every pregnant woman who has been brutalized in custody, every person of color who has been dehumanized by authorities, every individual who has been crushed by a system that forgot its purpose." Matthews was led away in handcuffs, and Naomi allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Justice was not just served, it was restored. 6 months later, Naomi sat on the porch of her new home, a farmhouse in Virginia, far from the corruption of big cities, but close enough to Washington that she could continue her work reforming the federal judiciary. Hope Elizabeth Carter was 3 months old now, a beautiful baby girl with her mother's eyes and a laugh that could heal any wound. She slept peacefully in a bassinet beside Naomi, while her mother worked on the memoir that would become a bestseller and a blueprint for criminal justice reform. Daniel had moved to Virginia as well, opening a practice that specialized in representing victims of prosecutorial misconduct. He was not just Naomi's partner in exposing corruption. He had become her partner in life, the man who understood her mission and shared her commitment to ensuring that what happened to them never happened to anyone else. The divorce from David had been finalized the previous month. He was serving 47 years in the same federal prison system he had helped corrupt, experiencing firsthand the brutality he had profited from for years. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked, settling into the chair beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Naomi looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully in the afternoon sunlight, surrounded by evidence of the new life they had built from the ashes of the old corruption. "Only that it took so long," she said, "and that so many people suffered while I was learning how to fight back. You couldn't have known. I could have looked harder, asked better questions, refused to accept that the system was fundamentally good when all the evidence pointed to systematic rot." She paused. "But I know better now. We all know better now." The Justice Solutions Incorporated prosecutions had resulted in the largest criminal justice reform in American history. Over 300 officials had been arrested, including 12 federal judges, 6 Supreme Court clerks, and 43 members of Congress. The private prison industry had been dismantled. Police departments had been restructured. Prosecutorial misconduct now carried mandatory federal penalties. And most importantly, people were paying attention. Citizens who had never questioned how their courts operated were demanding transparency. Voters who had never considered the connection between campaign donations and sentencing patterns were electing reformers. Communities that had been devastated by mass incarceration were finally receiving the resources to rebuild. Do you think it will last? Daniel asked. The reforms, the attention, the accountability? Naomi touched Hope's tiny hand, thinking about the world her daughter would inherit. It will last as long as people remember that justice is not something that happens to you. It is something you participate in. The moment we go back to assuming that someone else will protect our rights, someone else will fight corruption, someone else will stand up for what is right, that is the moment the predators return. She looked at Daniel, this man who had chosen redemption over self-preservation, who had risked everything to help her expose the truth. But I have hope that this generation learned something from watching the system collapse and rebuild. I have hope that my daughter will grow up understanding that citizenship means more than voting. It means vigilance. Hope stirred in her bassinet, opened her eyes, and looked directly at her mother with a clear, unflinching gaze of someone who had inherited both courage and purpose. "Hello, little revolutionary," Naomi whispered. "Ready to change the world? Before we end this story, I need you to do something. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why truth and justice matter, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept corruption as normal. And if you want more stories about people who fight back against impossible odds, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because there are heroes everywhere fighting battles we never hear about, and their stories deserve to be told. The revolution that began with Naomi Carter taking the judge's seat is still happening. The question is, will you be part of it? Thank you for watching this story of courage, justice, and the power of truth to overcome even the most entrenched corruption. Remember, the woman they thought was powerless changed everything. Will you change? Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.